Welcome, everybody. My name is Kyle Shelton. I'm the director of the Center for Transportation Studies. I appreciate you all coming. Many of you have stuck with us all the way from this morning, where we had a big group of supply chain and retail and logistics folks, and some of our law enforcement partners and agencies talking about the challenge of cargo theft and fraud and retail theft and fraud. And we are really excited to continue this conversation with this panel. I really want to thank all of you for coming one more time. I'm going to briefly give introductions, and then we're going to just jump into some of our questions. I'll also give a little bit of some of the statistics we talked about this morning on some of the challenges around cargo theft and fraud. But first, I'll do the introductions of who's with me here today. Ari Zelke, to my left here, is the general manager of Amazon Freight, who has over 2 decades of experience in technology and transportation. Currently in the general manager of Amazon Freight role, he's overseeing the externalization of Amazon's surface transportation network. And previously in the role of general manager of Amazon North America Surface Transportation, led the designing, building, and scaling of the company's transportation network, which includes 70,000 trailers and integrates technology for real-time tracking and optimization. Thanks for being here, Ari. To my left, Will Johnson is the Chief Special Agent and Assistant Vice President at BNSF Railway and leads the Railways Police Department. Chief Johnson has 28 years of law enforcement experience and serves as the Chief Special Agent and Assistant. Oh, that's repetitive. That's why you shouldn't just read the same thing. And BNSF Railways is one of the largest railroad companies in North America, operating in 28 states and 3 Canadian provinces. Thanks for being here, Will.
Thank you.
Matthew Benton is the Vice President for Carrier Experience for North American Surface Transportation at C.H. Robinson, and he has more than 27 years of experience, including 21 years of leadership and within the company and 7 years at the executive level at C.H. Robinson. C.H. Robinson serves 83,000 customers, contracts with more than 450,000 carriers, and manages 37 million shipments and $23 billion in freight annually. Pretty impressive. And last but not least is Cornell Hillenbrand, the Vice President of Security at J.B. Hunt Transport. He has been with the company in a security role for 24 years, and in his current role, he's responsible for overseeing security operations within the entire organization. J.B. Hunt has North America's largest intermodal fleet with 119,000 company-owned containers, 100,000 chassis, and a dray fleet of 6,300 trucks. So lots of heavy hitters in our freight and supply chain space today, and we're really excited to dig into some of the topics we've talked about. As I promised, I wanted to just highlight, before I jump into some of the questions, a few of the statistics about what we went over this morning and started to think about how we conceptualize this problem of cargo and freight fraud, which is very large. Cargo theft year over year has been increasing since the pandemic, really. 40 to 60%. It really depends on how we talk about what pieces we're talking about and which type of theft and fraud we're talking about. But on the whole, it's been increasingly dramatic. It's been increasing dramatically since 2020. In particular, strategic theft, really theft by deception, which is fraud, has increased by some estimates by 1,500% since 2022. And that is just on the cargo and freight side. We talked a lot this morning as well about the way that impacts the retail industry, which also has a huge number of challenges and also large losses. And one of the things that we hit on today as well is that this challenge is one that is not just on the company's side and not just on the retailer side, on the logistic company side or on the retailer side. It also impacts all of us as consumers because all the costs that go into your operations, into retail partners' operations, eventually trickle down to us as well. So with that, one logistical question or statement. If you have questions, we're going to do note cards. So if you have a note card and have a question, otherwise I'm going to go through my questions. You can raise those note cards up, and I will happily incorporate those into the flow of the day as well. And when we run out of steam with questions, we'll have some desserts and refreshments out in the lobby, and just appreciate you all joining us again today. I'm going to start with a, I think, pretty straightforward question, y'all, which is one to each of you, which is just, can you tell us a little bit more about where cargo theft impacts you on the day-to-day in your companies, in your business, in your work, sort of what's at stake, and how do you conceptualize the problem in your work at each of your companies? We'll just start with you and can go down the line.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Kyle. So when we think about what it looks like from a cargo theft perspective within a rail environment, it consumes the focus of our police force every day in terms of how we can protect not only our network, our customers' freight, the communities where we operate. At the end of the day, the police's mission is to prevent harm and reduce victimization. And I think that through the dialogue today, we've demonstrated that victimization is far beyond just the monetary cost of lading. It's what that lading represents to communities, whether it's food security, whether it's products that communities need for water treatment facilities, or it's clothing and shoes and that sort of thing. All of these things impact the community. And so allowing criminal enterprises, organized cartel groups, or other bad actors to impact or harm communities is candidly just unacceptable. And so we think about it every day, and our goal is to participate in forums like this to help broaden understanding for individuals that may not have direct access to it every day. But I think from each of the panelists, you're going to hear a different perspective of how all of us are focusing on that same thing, but from very different perspectives, but all with the same goal in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bill. All right,
Good. Agree with everything Will just said. The only thing that I would add on, whether it's a consumer retail customer or an Amazon freight shipping customer, we make a promise and a commitment to deliver their goods to a certain location at a certain time and destination. And when that doesn't happen, it's a problem. It's a defect, and we're not delivering on our promise. And theft is one of the areas that can cause disruption in the supply chain. We've taken a technology-first approach to mitigating theft. And so whether it's GPS tracking sensors or cameras, a variety of different technologies that we're using in our yards and over the road to detect anomalies that are different than a normal flow of goods and can lead us down a path of either stopping or at least having the right data to work with law enforcement to investigate and reduce the level of theft. It's super important to us and super important to our customers.
thanks, all right. Matt?
I would say it's important to our entire organization in North America, and it consumes over 5,000 employees' day-to-day operations. I wouldn't say consume, but it's part of, let's say that. Every single employee at C.H. Robinson, even though we do take a technology-first approach very similar to Amazon, has to have training. And we have to make sure that when all of the layers and all the tactics are deployed, there's always that human in the loop when there is an exception. So it's just part of our culture now. And I think that while that sounds great, the negative part is there's hidden costs associated to this for the entire organization, not just ours, but all the organizations here represented, to make sure that our customers' freight is safe. So we do the best we can. We're not perfect, but this is a problem that impacts everyone. Everyone on stage, consumers, customers, and all of our employees.
Thanks, Matt. Cornell, any perspective you have from JBM?
Well, kind of the same thing as the previous three, but it's really made us take a look at our processes and how we do business. As the strategic theft hit and fraud became such a big issue, we had to go through every bit of our operations, our process, how we handle our carriers, how we recruit and maintain the carrier pool. Working on like our supply chain security team. We divided the security team into basically pre and post incident. The pre-incident teams, there would be carrier investigations and supply chain that focus on protecting the freight and preventing it. The cargo theft investigation team would pick it up as soon as the event occurred. It kind of threw security into the forefront where it had never really lived before. We live in Northwest Arkansas. There's not a lot of crime there, so I used to be able to count on two hands how many stolen loads we'd have a year. It changed things pretty drastically.
And actually, Cornell, maybe I'll stick with you if you have thoughts on this, but I'd love to explore a little bit, and I should have maybe started with a bit of a level set. Can you all just talk a little bit more about what the fraud and the theft actually looks like for folks who maybe are not dealing with you all each day? Like you're mentioning you had a couple loads a year, maybe now that's growing. What are the types of theft and fraud we're talking about, and maybe can we just kind of dig into what that looks like?
So two main types of theft. Straight theft, which is theft of a load unattended, usually doesn't involve violence because it ratchets up the penalties. That's what I dealt with probably the first 20 years of my career. Strategic theft is theft involving some means of deception. So a fictitious pickup, an email compromise where credentials for a load board are acquired, or they pull the load information out of the email itself. A DOT or an MC sale where the bad guy buying the DOT, specifically buys the DOT, buys logins to load boards, will buy the email, and we've even seen it in contracts where they want the actual cell phone that's used for the MFA.
Yeah.
They will take that information and get onto a load board, find the loads that they want to look for, book those loads, and then repost them on another load board, changing the receiver address to, say, a warehouse that they control. So it's a misdirected load. A legitimate carrier picks it up and makes that run, drops it off, thinks everything's okay. And as soon as the receiver, the customer, or the carrier, the broker realizes there's been a theft, the first person you go to is that carrier that picked it up, because that's who you really have information on. The other guy's, it's bought the MC, it's a ghost. He just delivered the load. There's not a lot to trace, and by then they've usually bounced it at least once or twice, and it's gone. So that's the main ones we see. As lately, it's the email compromise has been the biggest change this year. Last year, you would see that with carriers maybe a couple of times a month, and now it's multiple times a week. So it's something you really got to stay on top of.
Yeah, and that was something that I was really struck by this morning as we were talking about it throughout the day, just how quickly the type of fraud changes, and I imagine trying to keep up with it is very difficult as well. Are there any other pieces of the particular beyond what Cornell was highlighting that you all would say has been impacting you in a different way?
I would say, in something we talked about upstairs earlier today, trying to educate the carrier community, and there are hundreds of thousands of active authorities out there, but trying to educate them on keeping their data safe and making sure that they have really good digital hygiene is something that we kind of deploy, regular marketing, a lot of outreach to our carriers. They're susceptible to clicking on a phishing link, or sometimes, hey, this offer is really great. It's $1,200, 200 miles. And sometimes if it's too good to be true, it is. But we've really tried to get to the root cause of that, educating the carriers to keep their data safe and to limit the number of account takeovers.
Yeah. I was very struck as well this morning by some of the parallels to one of the people who joined us from a smaller carrier was mentioning sort of this idea that financial institutions have been dealing with this type of identity fraud now for 20 years, give or take, and sort of seeing it applied in different sectors and seeing the criminal organizations say, oh, this might work in freight and supply chain, look at these gaps. And one of the pieces also as a non-supply chain professional that I was thinking about today as well is just some of the very systems that you all have in place where it is, a supplier is shifting it to a carrier who's taking it to a different destination. By its very nature, there are lots of those transition points where when one thing falls apart, I think I saw it in one of the IACP publications you shared, is if a system with a lot of gaps then scaled up and sped up leads to a lot of challenges there too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you have just the cascading consequences beyond just the transportation sector. And so if you've got these criminal actors in a rail environment that are sabotaging safety systems to be able to stop trains to commit their act, they're also impeding and disrupting public transportation, right? And other systems that are happening within communities and creating traffic backups within the rail network, which now you might have EMS or fire services that can't access certain neighborhoods because we've got a crossing that may be blocked, not because we wanted to stop a train there, but because we have to because a criminal act is happening. And all of these things start rippling across the community, impacting broader audiences and without the full understanding of what the original intent of that criminal act was.
Yeah. And Will, actually, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about some of the challenges on the law enforcement response side. We talked about, knowing that the origin and the destination of a shipment, it could be national, if not international, and there are multiple steps along the way where a theft or a fraud might occur. What are some of the things you would highlight for folks who are maybe?
So I really appreciate that question because, oftentimes, anytime somebody is victimized, there's a level of frustration that something happened that shouldn't have, right? And then victims start assessing motive of, well, why is this happening? And so we try to break it down in terms of, you've got a police officer out there and he's just been informed or she's just been informed that a load has been compromised that started in Los Angeles and now has arrived in New York with no idea where the offense took place. The challenge of even getting a police entity to take a report at that moment sometimes can be very challenging. And so as we focus on supply chain security and reduction of organized cargo theft, it's how do we reduce the victimization of all those involved? How do we reduce barriers that are presently inhibiting victims from being able to report and come forward? And then ultimately, in our constitutional republic, effective prosecution to change criminal behavior is a requirement. And so we've got to be thinking about what are the elements or the evidence that's necessary to provide prosecutors for effective prosecution so that we can truly change criminal behavior.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And one of the things we've talked about in the prep for this panel and throughout the day today as well is sort of what we can do with data and information. And I'm wondering if any of you would want to weigh in on some of what we heard or discussed this morning in terms of part of what you're talking about, Will, on the prosecution side is understanding the scope of the problem and understanding where in our networks those sort of challenges are arising. Can you all share your perspectives on like what data could we get or how would we get it? And then how do we effectively share and collaborate across companies, but also agencies, state, local, federal?
Yeah, I'll take the first part of that. I think a lot of the data exists. I think sharing the data in a confidential and pseudo real-time way is what's missing, so that it actually can take action and get the bad guys. And I think that either isn't done because there isn't the mechanism for it, which is part of it, or also isn't done because the defect isn't known until downstream, either 5 states later or 3 days of trailer dwell later when the trailer gets unloaded and realize there's something missing. And so making sure that we have more mechanisms and that are tied into real-time alerting and semi-real-time connection to law enforcement is going to get a much higher hit rate of actually stopping the bad behavior.
Great. Yeah.
I think more of these forums, are very helpful. It's interesting. I talk to a lot of customers and carriers and a lot of people in transportation, and if you've been around the last couple of years, fraud and theft and account takeover and all these different things, they're all top of mind. But as soon as I would move into my private life outside of C.H. Robinson and mention this, people would look at me like I'm crazy. Like, what are you talking about? That happens? So I think the more education we can get out there in the public, and the really understanding that everyone in this room, whether you have a question or not, you're impacted because you're buying goods and services. And the number of dollars associated to theft and fraud, they don't just live at the customer entity. They do get passed down over the course of time to the consumers, whether that's in delays, whether that's in price increases. So it is a driver of inflation, and it does matter to everybody. So spread the word.
Yeah. And one of the pieces we talked about in connection to this as well, and really the addressing of this challenge is really thinking about addressing it collectively. We've talked about a lot about private industry being one leg of the stool, law enforcement being a public agency that is a key actor here, and then the broader government agencies. I'm also just curious, within those 3 entities, but then also just in the work you're doing now, what is that, knowing that we've all talked about this, the collaboration is critical. What does collaboration look like for you right now, and what are the types of things you would like to see, whether it's in some of the data pieces you were talking about, Ari, or other spaces? I know you all have talked about having some ongoing conversations company to company, and I think people are curious about what that looks like. Correct?
So there are several groups that most of the participate in either the fraud roundtable. There's other theft roundtables. being active in the cargo theft security councils that are spread out throughout the U.S., being active with the different, what's left of the cargo theft task force, CTIP and some of the others, and just attending the national cargo theft meetings and getting involved with, the law enforcement that is actually working cargo theft. It's such a small number of specific individuals. Mm-hmm. It's, over the last 10 years, I want to say probably 3/4 of the cargo theft task force have been minimized or defunded and reduced. You still have CTIP, you still have, Miami's got some, but it's really more doing auto theft, as is New Jersey and I think even Illinois at the same time. They all used to be really well-defined and funded, and it's not anymore. So it's a lot of it gets put on private industry to run, the investigations down. It's a crime against property and not a crime against person, so it's not triaged very high. Law enforcement is under a lot of pressure currently, have been for the last few years, and this isn't something that's, it doesn't hit the high water mark of them throwing a lot of resources at. Yeah. The data that we talked about on full load theft, I think we've got a good data sample because that gets turned in quite a bit. Whether it makes it to CargoNet and some of the other groups that record and report on it, not so much, but at least full load theft gets turned into law enforcement, and you kind of know where it occurred, even if it was strategic. You can back your way into it pretty quickly. Pilferage, which is something that Will and I get to deal with plenty, is much more challenging because if it happens on the rail, that could be a 1,500 or more mile run. A lot of times when we talk to the customers, the seal issue and the loss is discovered at the destination ramp. And so they all think that this one ramp is where it's all happening. Where it's anywhere on the line, it's just not seen until then. And it's much harder, aside from Rail PD making a seal incident report or a police report on it, you can't go anywhere else to get a report. And, the rails have their own railroad police. They generally don't share a whole lot of that information publicly because it's just their info. It's not like theft overall. And I think recently the talk you gave to the Commerce Committee, the AAR released some data on theft. And I think that's the first time I've seen full rail theft data released, which is a step in the right direction, I think, because we've got to get some attention on all forms of cargo theft to get the federal funding and attention to get something done about it. Not trying to put you on the hot seat, Will, sorry.
No, but I think it highlights an excellent point, which is just how is crime statistics gathered in the United States, right? And participating in the National Incident-Based Reporting System reported to the FBI on an annual basis. There is a hypersensitivity around duplicate or triplicate reporting for one criminal incident, right? And so even establishing through groups like this and through national collaboration, where is that reporting going to take place, right? Is it going to take place within the rail sector? Certainly that is one solution. But we're the only sector that has a police force, right? All the other sectors don't have that. And so is it reported at the jurisdiction where it happened or the jurisdiction where it's reported? And so I think working through those is really important in terms of being able to make sure that our data collection is the most productive that it can be. But I want to go back to something else that you said, which was about just kind of the escalations against crimes against persons. Because when you look at just kind of the explosive evolution of cargo theft, it really happened within the confluence of three things, right? We had a global pandemic that disrupted all supply routes, right? And created this accordion effect where supply chains were elongated and then compressed and just really out of historical norms. Two, you had a complete disruption of societal behavior, which included an escalation of crimes against persons to an unprecedented levels. So in the most urban centers of America, assaults with weapons, with murders, went up dramatically. That is always going to pull public policing into a direction that is incongruent with property crimes, which is exactly what Cornell was really talking about. And then the final piece of all this is, once criminals become more sophisticated in their craft and get a greater ROI, and I know you've spoken about this many times, you know, they doubled or tripled the amount of revenue they were getting off of their illicit behavior. So instead of 20 cents on the dollar being recovered through their selling of product, you know, we're seeing it at 70 or 80 cents on the dollar. And all three of those colliding together really put us in this position, I think, that it has become, as Ari described this morning, material to all of us to be able to address.
Yeah.
That increased dollar amount that they're getting is also making them more aggressive. You talked about the crimes against person. My
Yeah.
first 20 years, I could count on one hand how many armed hijackings I had and probably still have a couple of fingers left. Not anymore. That's a year. We didn't see this before. We're seeing more weapons being found when they are doing the raids. You know, and the money they've gotten, you see more daylight box truck hits and final mile deliveries being stopped and hijacked, or the back emptied out just, you know, at noon on a Tuesday.
Yeah.
They're much more aggressive because they want the money.
I think it's important to understand too, and you know, I don't know how well the audience, I know some of you out there know this, but these are very sophisticated, organized crime rings. They're multinational, they're well-funded, and for many of them, cargo theft is how they fund their more nefarious operations, such as guns and drugs, which are kind of their number one focus. And I think you've seen some of this stuff happen recently where, you know, Canada, for example, actually caught a group transporting across the border. This was definitely part of one of these very sophisticated cartels. They were shipping over $50 million of cocaine from Detroit to Canada. They ran a sting. And what were they doing? They were using semis, tractor trailers full of goods, but also hiding drugs to use this cross-border kind of operation. So they're very dangerous folks and very sophisticated.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of you have mentioned some of the technologies that you've put in place. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit more about like what that has allowed internally to your companies. And then I would maybe to all four of you, I'm curious when we talked a little bit about this as well, like this goes back to the collaboration. When you find something that works at Amazon, how do we share that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or how do we talk about, hey, this is, you know, without going, one of the things we also talked about is you all have proprietary information and practices, right? And it goes to the data, it goes to a lot of what we've talked about. I think there's sort of the middle line of we are all better in this space when the things that are good deterrents are shared, while also, you know, enabling everybody to do their own business. So I'd be curious to also think about that section of it, but maybe just starting with, what are some of the things that you could share about how you've used technology? Ari, maybe starting with you.
Yeah, sounds good. We've done a lot of things in implementing technology in supply chain that were maybe new and a little bit bold at the time, mostly to optimize our supply chain, but there's also been a lot of benefits and then specific programs around theft related to that. So one is cameras in our trailers, which a majority of our trailer fleet runs majority of our goods. We have cameras in many of those to have visibility to what's happening in the trailer, to understand loaded, not loaded, percent loaded, et cetera. Also gives you nice visibility if there's something bad happening, or visibility, kind of eye in the sky when your trailer is at a remote site or not necessarily at a site where you have people there. We also have implemented things such as door sensors on the doors, which you would think would be unnecessary, but the interesting thing about door sensors is now you can detect when a trailer door is opened at a non-authorized site, like a random location, should never happen, and then you can alert at the moment, back to my earlier point about real time, versus waiting until the trailer gets to the yard, then seeing a seal is missed. Meanwhile, your goods are long gone. Mm-hmm. And so we've focused on detection and as much as possible real-time detection on the actual flow of goods within the assets that we control within our 70,000 plus trailer fleet. Also, to the earlier point on detecting bad actors driving loads, we've implemented selfie checks within our mobile application. So we built an application right here in Minneapolis called Amazon Relay, and all of our drivers execute their loads with that application. We added a functionality over the last year or so where we require a selfie photo of all drivers in our network, and they have to verify it multiple times during the load with some of our technology that actually is them. So it virtually removes the ability for them to kind of hand off to other drivers along the point, and that has also been a beneficial technology that we've seen help bend the curve on this. So we continue to iterate. You know, as you said, bad actors are very sophisticated. They're always coming up with new approaches, and we have used technology throughout our operations to try to mitigate ahead of that.
Yeah, thanks, sorry. Matt, is there anything you got?
Yeah, I would say the fraud roundtable that Cornell mentioned is a great forum for us, and we have an NDA, and so we can openly discuss and share, you know, data-based ideas or how third parties are performing, and I think that's been beneficial for me from a learning standpoint. Where we focused the most recently has been on, and I'm not going to say it's agentic AI. We're not that sophisticated yet. But we do use kind of the generative AI process, and essentially what we do is we score every shipment based upon the risk characteristics at the time of booking. Mm-hmm. And so anytime we match commodities and carriers, whether they're in different parts of the country, whether, you know, they have different load values, it's like 5 pages or so of things that we look at in real time. We score every shipment for risk, and if it's elevated, we stop the shipment at that point, and that's when the human in the loop jumps in and kind of double checks everything and says, hey, this looks good, we validated, or no, there's too much risk here, we're not going to proceed. And at that point, if the carrier is suspect and they've been compromised, then we kind of shut them down. Mm-hmm. So we really try to focus more on making sure that the bad actor actually never gets booked on the shipment. We're as close to real time as we can be at this point. We're as sophisticated as our data is, but that's where we've been focusing.
Yeah, and I think that piece that you're bringing up about the carriers, that jumped out to me this morning as well, again, because there are lots of small carriers, right?
Yeah.
And you made the great point, I think, as well already today about the education side of that, of you got to make sure they are aware of that and these pieces.
I think the risk for small carrier, we talked about this again earlier, and I don't know if it's going to come up again, but insurance premiums continue to skyrocket. A lot of the insurance premiums are skyrocketing because of theft and fraud. Insurance companies, you know, I think Will outlined this earlier, there's no victimless crime. Someone's always the victim, and sometimes it's them. And what do they do if they're the victim? They increase their premiums, and it makes it worse for everyone. So carriers have to be vigilant in this process. Otherwise, they all actually kind of are penalized. Whether that's fair or not, that's reality.
Yeah. And it's also just a reminder of how integrated all of these systems are. We realized earlier today that we didn't have insurers in the room as we were talking about this, and that being a really large gap, because it forces decisions from all of you and all of your partners as well to say, well, if we're going to do this and we can't get the insurance rates we need or don't know what we're going to get back, much less the actual process for, hey, a load was taken, how do we go through the insurance process? That I learned with its own can of worms, right? Cornell or Will, anything to add on the technology or implementation side?
We've tried we've thrown a lot of effort at it.
Yeah.
Starting with, making sure you have a clean carrier base. We use third party. There's a variety you can use, but we use highway and verified carrier. So we've got extra sets of eyes on the carrier base itself. All of the strategic theft basically came about because of automated onboarding, digital load boards, and now a digital marketplace. So, everybody throws the word AI around a lot. We do it internally in the company, and I try to reel back on some of it. But we've got algorithms and some alerts and detections for 17 different indicators of bad activity inside of our systems, whether it's our carrier system or inside of the load boards itself. And we've got the carrier investigation team that sits in our SOC and reports up to me, monitors that. They're staffed 24/7. We've had significant reductions in our exposure to strategic theft. The hardest thing, though, to detect is that email compromise or the sold MC. As long as they don't come in and just set off all the alarms, they behave somewhat normally, they're going to get the first load. So, with that, trying to keep a clean carrier base and prevent as much access to the customer load as possible. We've got tracking on 98% of our fleet. I want to say we've got 130,000 pieces of trailing equipment. The supply chain security team monitors covert trackers on our high value and high risk loads. Not every high value load, but the customers that we set up for that, because it seems like most companies drew, we did $100,000 as a high value load. Well, now nearly every load is $100,000. So, being able to alert on deviations out of route, because every strategic theft deviates out of route. Red zone stops, other things that put the load at risk so that you can act on it and hopefully prevent the theft. Also, the drivers know that, because there's constant communication between the team and them on all of their stops, they know that they're being watched, and hopefully that is a deterrent as well.
Yep.
On the post-event, where we're using companies like GenLogs, really it's getting a body there as quickly as possible and using any technology that's available, whether it's a camera system across the street, the GenLogs cameras for trailer numbers, anything you can get to try to wrap up and put a bow tie on the information that you can pass to law enforcement so that they can work it. So,
From a technology perspective, we talk about how do police use the technology, and if the biggest challenge within the policing domain is venue, where did it happen, right? We're using technology to have, to leverage machine learning at inspection portals, to look at trains that are passing through, to really look for three things. Is the door open? Are the handles in the appropriate position? And is the seal intact? And that the machine learning is constantly getting better at detecting those things. Because if I can say that the offense happened between Los Angeles, San Bernardino, that's great. But if I can say it happened at milepost 27 on the San Bernardino sub, now the sophistication by which I'm deploying police assets to a defined geographic location in response to crime trends is far more surgical than just the amount of resources required to flood an area, because it's happening there intuitively, but you don't have the precise location. And those sites have been deployed presently, and we've got plans for many more of those locations to be deployed throughout the remainder of this year. And we think that's going to be a value add for our customers, and it's going to improve some of the work product that's being presented towards to prosecutors for successful prosecution of cases.
Yeah, nice. And one thing we talked about this afternoon that jumped out to me as well was the idea of using, and Ari, I think you mentioned this as well with some of your technologies, that we're starting more about like, how is our system working and how do we keep, how are we making sure we're getting the packages where they need to go efficiently, and then you're starting to realize other value adds on the security side. I think pieces, what you were just saying, Will, I'm recalling another conversation with BNSF colleagues around just how does machine learning help inspect the track, right?
Sure.
Oh, look, there's a tree down, or the switch is done, and we don't have the people power to be out there checking every piece of it. Same idea of it's coming through a rail yard. We can maybe look at all of these elements. So because this is so integral to every piece of your operation, it feels like many of them we're implementing this step that has a knock-on effect on the security side of things that might also just be a useful operational piece as well, right?
Absolutely.
We've talked a lot about, obviously fraud can take place in a lot of different locations. I'm also curious, just you all either operate big intermodal yards, big warehouses, other facilities. Are there location-specific challenges? Are there like on-site or other security pieces that have changed? I mean, we've talked also about like how this has changed over time. I mean, just kind of curious, like I started today's conversation in the morning about like, I haven't thought a lot about, supply chain security. If I was, it might be the giant intermodal yard right over here off the university. That's the thing that comes to mind. Where do those kind of physical spaces play into the work you're doing? And in some ways, they're more under your control and more facilities that you have, I assume, other technology on. But how do you think about those spaces within this network?
You want to start?
Go for it.
I'll jump in. I think one of the difficult pieces of that is just the sheer complexity of the supply chain in North America. And when you think about all of the customers, and they have partner warehouses, They have a lot of vendors. Maintaining secure shipping locations at every shipping dock across the United States is almost an impossible task. They don't all have cameras. They don't all have fenced yards. They don't all have really good driver checks. They don't all have process checks or best practices. And so it's just got to be this continuous education, and they've got to continue to invest in the safety and the security of the cargo day after day, week after week. You'd be shocked about how many times, we do experience an incident and we say, hey, what was your process? And they're like, well, we don't know. Or, hey, do you have photographs of this tractor? And they say, we have no camera system. And so I think that's what makes it really challenging. I'm not saying I'm offering up a solution, but I think it's just continuous learning and continuous improvement.
Yeah, I think maybe two sides to that story. I think for us, in our Amazon-owned yards, which we have over 600 in the United States, it's a contained use case. So fenced-in yards with security cameras, technology we built called Relay Gate that verifies license plate, DOT number, load that they're on, location that they're on, trailer that's supposed to be there. So we can verify and, with redundancy, verify that the tractor and the trailer that shows up is supposed to show up. Otherwise, we don't let them in. We have security arms that go in and out, as well as a number of other sensors around the site to ensure that our buildings are secure and that what's supposed to be in the yard is in the yard and what's supposed to leave the yard does leave the yard and nothing else. But I agree with you on the third-party yard sites. We have, one of the reasons we have cameras inside our trailers is because sometimes that's the only visibility we have to that third-party site. And depending on the size of an operation that you have, it's a small yard with a few trailers, it's hard to justify a large tech investment. There's plenty of mid-sized shippers that probably should have more sophisticated yards too, though. But yes, I think it is, across the industry, it's a challenging situation to solve.
I think it's important to focus on what you can control, right? And so when we have the physical space of your yards and facilities, you have the maximum amount of control in those spaces. And so how do you create concentric rings of prevention efforts to eliminate risk for crime? Because when you do a good job there, then you can move to the next kind of order of security and prevention, which is, how do I provide a forward-leaning posture for security in areas that I don't control, right? Or I have limited control, or maybe it's through a partnership that I'm leveraging security. Because if you can't achieve the security that you're looking for, where you operate with the most levels of control, you're not going to be able to extend into those areas where you have lesser degrees of control. And we find that approach through our prevention model, but more importantly through empowering our workforce and giving them the resources that they need to address the concerns within their area of responsibility, and then holding them accountable for the delivery of police services in those areas, right? And because all crime is going to be local, and frankly, the customer's impact of crime here regionally, they may or may not care what's happening in the state of Texas or what's happening in California in terms of crime, but they absolutely care what's happening here. And so your security plan's got to be flexible enough to have a national aperture, but be able to execute it on a local level.
And actually, Will, that segues into another question, and then we've touched on the relationship between y'all's companies, the security, and law enforcement, local, state, national. One of the things we explored a little today was sort of the challenge of when there is no clear venue, or it's sort of the hot potato of, well, it was this 1,500-mile track, and so do we want Phoenix, or do we want Salt Lake City, or do we want whomever? Can we just talk a little bit more about like what options are there when you're trying to investigate something that's beyond your company at some point? Like when you're looking to move to a law enforcement partner, do you start with locals? We talked a little bit about trying to involve the FBI or federal partners, right? And I know there's national legislation right now to create another body within HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, right, to kind of coordinate those investigations. But obviously the type of theft that rises to that level is also different. Can you just, I think more on that foundational, like how does this process work, and when this thing happens and your officers are done with it, or any of your teams are done with it, or want to get more partners involved, what does it look like, and what are the obstacles to kind of coordinating that seamlessly now?
Honestly, I think it's opportunities like today, just roundtable and discussion with colleagues from different perspectives on how do we approach this challenge. Absent unified engagement from the transportation sector professionals, law enforcement is going to respond to it the best way that they can, but they may not fully understand what they don't know, right? I've learned so much about just this space over the last 5 years, but it's been shocking to me leading a large municipal agency before joining BNSF, what I didn't know was occurring, right? So I think that really moves us to at least our third pillar of our crime fighting strategy, which is public policy and advocating for the executive branch to activate the resources that are available to promote the most good, right? So do we have those point of contacts? I know that Cornell talks with some professional organizations on how we can collaborate, national standards, points of contact, and these sorts of things that are critical. But those relationships have to be fostered and fed daily, really. Because if you're trying to foster those relationships in a crisis moment or after the offense has already happened, you're likely to not be as successful as putting the time in before the crime happens to be able to have those relationships.
Yeah, it's important to have those relationships ahead of time, going to the cargo theft conferences and, meeting the investigators, supporting them, sponsoring them to go, getting your phone number in their cell phone and theirs in yours. I mean, you have to start local. With strategic theft, usually it's pretty simple. It's going to be where the load was picked up at. You get local PD to respond to that. If it's California, try to get them to release it as quickly to CHP to help as possible. Going above that, maybe HSI could get involved, but there would have to be a tie-in, and FBI is a lot further up the chain. It's very few of those cases that they actually get involved in. So it's going to be local and state level contacts that you're going to engage with first. Working with other investigators in the industry, whether they work for the insurance company, they work for the security teams of the customers, getting to know those teams and interact with them and work with them is the best thing you can do, because you need information from each of them and they need the information from you. Nobody has all of it. I've got the tracking and the driver information or the carrier information, where you would have as Amazon the manifest of what's on it, or your shipper, say it's a manufacturer, you would be able to lean in and get it from them. But we need all of that to get it to law enforcement for that, just even the initial report.
Yeah. And I think, Will, that goes to something you said earlier as well on the venue side of things. Earlier today, you made the point that the relationship side of this really also depends on the prosecutor's office, the attorney general's offices, the county attorney's offices, knowing that the cases are going to come, right? We had some colleagues with us today who were sort of saying, like, I don't see these cases, right? So this is under the radar for me because they're not coming before me. And this idea of having clarity, whether it is at the state level or the national level, to say, if this type of crime occurs or this type of fraud occurs, these are your eligible venues. That also then allows you to say, okay, local PD or sheriff's office or state agency, we're going to be bringing these to you because this is, if something occurs here, it's here. That allows you to build that relationship and that rapport and say, here's what we can give you in the event that these things happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Cornell, you also mentioned briefly going back to the data, and I'm just I think we can talk a little bit more about this as well. We spent some time today talking about the sharing of the data, and you've already alluded to this. I think you guys are talking about the roundtable, some of the proprietary information, the way that you all as companies can feel secure, and we want to share this data, but know that our processes are protected and that our what each of these pieces that you all know very well that you deal with on a daily basis aren't exposed to undue risk, and you're not sharing information you don't want to share. We highlighted the flow model that we talked about as being a part of the earlier stages of supply chain uncertainty during the pandemic, and this idea that those companies that are importing goods and primarily coming into American ports, the vulnerabilities that were unique to them were often hard to respond to because the information was not available, and that individual companies said, well, I'm not going to share that with you. You're my competitor, and I don't want you to know how my patterns work. And that contributed to some of the supply chain challenges. We were talking a little bit about how that might be a corollary that we could use here. And I'm curious, as you guys had sat with that and thought about that a little bit today, what pieces of that idea of like having a model, having a space where that data that we've talked about you collecting could be shared, and what would it look like, and what would you need to, what would you want it to produce for you all and for your peers if there was something like that?
I think what we'd want it to produce is more efforts in combating cargo theft, obviously, funding,
Yeah.
legislative oversight, or just prosecutions. You get a lot, and we've seen a trend recently where companies that used to report to CargoNet, which is the largest probably aggregator of cargo theft crime, it's accepted by, most law enforcement use this as their contact, but we've seen companies pull back and not turn in their thefts. And there's quite a few companies that don't. I'll be honest with you, we didn't participate in CargoNet until probably 2012 maybe. So, there's a lot of companies that do, but it's so underreported. About probably 5% of cargo theft actually makes it to CargoNet. Now, full stolen loads, I would close to 100% of those are turned in by most companies because you've got to get a police report to get anything done on it. Pilferage, not so much. Unless it's a major pilferage that hits a dollar threshold that you need a police report. If it's a small amount, and especially if you have a challenge about knowing where it happened. If it was OTR, that driver stopped over the road, and that driver stopped at multiple stops and doesn't know where it happened, you'll never get anybody to take that report. The rail might not know where it happened, but it was in their position, so they'll take the report as long as it hasn't switched to another rail. So let's say a load that started at Hobart and BNSF in California and ended up at, Croxton, New Jersey. The seal break was discovered there. You can probably get, maybe, NS to take the report, but they're not going to take the blame because it could have happened anywhere on that rail line. Now, I don't know a whole lot about the claims process. I try to stay out of that and just stick to the security thing, but there's reasons, and I can understand why.
Smart.
Yeah, if, I know if we outgate with a load and our driver doesn't do a walk around and report that seal break, the NSF or any rail company has every right to say, hey, he took it out. He could have taken more stuff out. That's a legitimate reason to refuse a claim. So limited your exposure to that is what a company's going to try to do if it can.
I don't know why you don't want to take on another intractable process in your day job. You don't want to deal with insurance claims and security.
You're good. I think the data sharing has to come with some element of speed, because what these bad actors often do is a quick strike, and it's not all in one location. They might spread out across 4 or 5 or 6 different entities, but it's all happening almost simultaneously. And so to be able to notify everyone who's being impacted as soon as one person catches would probably help us with our mitigation efforts.
So, for example, the investigation team has a 1-hour time clock to get it reported to CargoNet. And Highway, we're a little sloppy on verified carrier, but if we get it to Highway, we feel like, we've taken a stab at making that alert. But, some of the cases, it's a little bit tougher to figure out what's going on, but getting it up there quick is extremely important.
But the speed of sharing information is critical. Just this past weekend, we were notified on a Friday of a prolific organized group that targeted stealing containers. The entire workforce went on high alert on these individuals had been released from custody. The very next day, they hit a rail intermodal facility that wasn't associated with us, and were able to execute their crime. 2 days after that, they tried to hit our facility, and because of the communication and the awareness and the just kind of communication blitz, we were able to arrest 3 suspects on property without being able to execute their crime. But if we don't share information, we're basically hoping
Yeah.
that the standard protocols that are in place are going to prevent this. And these are strong protocols, don't get me wrong. But when you're dealing with people that are constantly altering their criminal behavior to outpace the protocols that are in place because they're constantly challenging them, you got to be right every single time. And that's incredibly difficult when you've got so many different actors and disciplines within the, just job titles that are involved, even outside of the security workforce, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And Matt, you mentioned this as well, sort of the complication of adding both the third-party piece of this, right, where you're working with somebody else to identify your carriers. That both has had some advantages. Obviously, it's part of how you all have been able to scale and work across the country with hundreds of thousands of carriers, but it adds its own layer of challenge, I assume, on the communication and the training and protocol following, right?
Yeah, I think you're only as fast as your third party is when you're reporting to a third party and, challenging them to disseminate that information to all other people that could be impacted. Not saying that they're not fast, but instantaneous is almost required as quick as some of these, these bad actors move. And, to Will's point, when we're wrong, it's an expensive lesson. And so we don't want to be wrong.
Right.
And as fast as we can communicate, I think the more right we're going to be.
And the more we do that right, we'll see the reward, and that will motivate the flywheel of people.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have gotten to benefit from a great deal of your expertise today, and we've had you with us for a whole day. I want to ask you one final question, then my suggestion, having not seen questions come in, is that we then kind of wrap and we can chat some more in the foyer with some refreshments and other things. We've covered a lot of ground even just in this panel today. I'm curious if there's anything, members of the public, audience members, just issues that we haven't touched on yet that you would say to a layperson who's not in the supply chain world. A key takeaway, a key thing to think about. Why is this a topic that matters to them? What would you leave somebody with?
I think I would end where I started, which is it's an expensive problem for shippers, carriers, brokers. There's hidden costs, and they do make it down to the consumer level. And, spreading awareness and trying to share information is kind of everybody's responsibility.
This morning it was described that this is a material threat to business. I would submit to this group that this is a material threat to our economic sovereignty as a nation state. And that if we don't bond together to eliminate this threat, then we're going to continue to be separated and picked off by these criminal groups that are hoping that we don't galvanize together with a solution towards this problem. And if we can simplify our message to where people that aren't involved in our profession can walk away within 45 seconds and understand this is the problem and this is how it impacts me, then I think we get broad stakeholder support because it impacts every single person in communities, financially. And I know that working together we can absolutely promote change for the good.
I think so. I would also see it's a critical, important problem and one that's solvable, right? We have technology, we have tools, we have process, we have cross-collaboration. I think we have all the pieces of the puzzle. It still will be hard, it still will take time, but I'm optimistic that we can bend the curve on this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Cornell, any last thoughts?
Unfortunately, security has a cost. You're going to pay it either way. You either pay it up front to apply security to the loads, or you can pay it after the fact, the loss. I think one of the biggest things to take away is the educating your carrier base, but educating your people, because as soon as they can't get through and compromise the carriers, they turn right back around and start the social engineering methods, against your own staff. But educating customers on the security risks that are out there so they can make the decisions on hardware and processes to protect their loads, and that it's a shared responsibility. You can't just put a plastic seal on a box and give it to me after I warned you that this is a high-risk load, it's going to be targeted.
Yeah.
The companies can only continue to eat those so many times before it gets too expensive.
Yeah, I think that awareness piece was something that came through loud and clear throughout the whole day, and part of my takeaway, again, as one of those sort of lay people at this point, I feel like I have this much more knowledge about it, where there's a whole lot still to gain, but really the awareness that, as you all have made clear, right, it's not just individual consumers, it's the small carriers that are in a lot of our communities where you think, why would that trucking company or that logistics company be impacted by this? One of our colleagues upstairs today was just, telling multiple stories about how their small company was impacted, and it is not just that financial ramification. Sometimes there's not even the financial ramification, but in a lot of cases, it could be an immense reputational hit, or it's something that they have to figure out, okay, this has happened to me, this fraud has been committed to me, against us, how do I respond, right? And I think having some of that awareness education on the whole issue and recognizing how much of a spectrum it covers, from some of our largest companies in the country and the world down to some of our direct neighbors on streets and communities all over is really critical too. So, well, thank you all. I hope you'll join me in thanking our panel, and we will reconvene. If folks can stay in our refreshments and in the foyer here and ask some more questions, but really appreciate all of your time today and the conversation here, and looking forward to continuing to work with you on these topics. So thanks.
Thank you.
Kyle.
Thank you.